So we have Bitcoin at over $100,000, and more importantly, we have Bitcoin up 147% year to date. And a lot of people are asking, after such an aggressive move in Bitcoin, when will this bull market actually end? Are we still in a 4-year cycle? Will we peak in April like we did in 2021? Will we peak in November next year? Will the cycle be longer? And then there's other people asking about Altseason and whether this, what we're experiencing now, is actually Altseason, or whether the real Altseason is still to come. And if the real Altseason is still to come, well, when is it going to arrive? And how low will the Bitcoin dominance actually go? That's what everybody's asking. So today I've got a very special treat for you guys. I've got a guy who called the cycle absolutely perfectly. Some of you know him. His name is Ben Cowen. And when Bitcoin dominance was sitting over here at 40%, he famously tweeted on the 11th of May 2022, he said Bitcoin dominance will go back up to 60%. He kept repeating his thesis, he got a lot of hate, and as we see today, Bitcoin topped at 60% and actually started coming down. And today we got Ben on our show to answer all the questions. How long will this bull market be? How high are we actually going to go? And when is alt season going to start? Should be a big show. You're going to enjoy this one. Let's go, guys. Wakey, rise and shine. It's another beautiful bull market day. I mean, we do have Bitcoin over $100,000. The altcoins looking good. I mean, we had a very good day yesterday. So I think the altcoins have started slightly calmed down. But in general, if you look at the week that we've had and the month that we've had a fantastic week. Big question obviously is this actually alt season, or is alt season yet to come? And there are of course two views there. The one view is that we're going to get a dip and then another spike up. And then the other view is that we're actually going to carry on going down from here. That's one of the things that we're actually going to resolve today with Ben. So it's going to be a big show. Before we get into the show, I do want to remind you that we are all going to make a lot of money in this cycle. That's just a reminder that I wanted to give you guys. I hope you guys are okay with that reminder. No jokes. So we are going to all make a lot of money in the cycle. That I'm almost willing to guarantee. If you just keep a calm head about yourself, you do the research, you follow the right people, you'll probably make money, because it's a bull market, and the bull market actually lifts everyone. But the question is, how many of you will actually keep your money? Now, a lot of you are going to make a mistake by selling too late, and you're not going to keep your money. Some of you are going to make other mistakes. The one mistake that you can't make is getting hacked. And the other mistake that you can't make is exposing to your governments where you're trading from and letting the government take the lion's share of your profit. You can't do that. If you want to avoid that, get yourself a VPN. I'm going to show you quickly what a VPN does. So what you do is you click here and you click on the 𝗕𝗢𝗡 on the link below, the one that says NordVPN, and you get a VPN. And the VPN allows you to surf without actually exposing your IP address. A lot of you don't know what this actually means, so I'm going to show you what this actually means. So let's have a look at this. This is what a VPN looks like. Right now you can see I'm not connected, but if I click on any one of these countries, then people will think that I am in Albania. And now, right now, the system or the internet thinks that I'm in Albania. Now, the Nord has a double feature, a double VPN. So then authorities really can't track where you are, and they can't actually track your wallet. Guys, it is the cheapest way to protect your crypto. It costs, I think, less than $3 a month or $3 a month. And not only that, you should probably take out the Nord Threat Protect. And the reason why you should take out the threat protection is because this is what stops those malicious websites that are designed to actually get you to put your private keys in and steal all your money. And the threat protect's actually done that. So listen, if you're serious about your crypto, $10 a month, less than $10 a month to make sure you're safe, please do it, and please don't delay. Please do it today. This morning we had a scare that maybe Gate was hacked. Maybe some people went the wrong exchange. Guys, it's not worth it. Just do it, and do it today. Don't delay, please. Don't delay. Just go and do it today. All right, let's go. Let's start the show. As I mentioned to you, our next guest is someone who has called this market spot on. And I know that there's not many people that have called this market spot on, but our next guest actually did do that. I want to just show you something. So this is a tweet from Ben, which says, Bitcoin will remind you why it's the king. Alt versus Bitcoin valuations are in for a reckoning. The story has been told in the past, and it's the same again. See you at 60% Bitcoin dominance. Now, that tweet was on the 11th of May, 2022. Let's quickly go look at where dominance was on the 11th of May, 2022. So this is the 11th of May, 2022. At the time, the Bitcoin dominance was at 41%. And that's when Ben tweeted that Bitcoin dominance will see you at 60. And he held his conviction, despite what everybody said. He held his conviction, and we just touched 60. And now I think everybody wants to know what Bitcoin dominance is going to do next. So here we're going to bring in Ben. Ben, how are you, sir?
Pretty good. How about you?
Man, it must feel so amazing having called the cycle so perfectly. I mean, first of all, you must have taken a lot of abuse. I think if I remember correctly, I was one of the abusers, right?
I think you flipped bullish on Bitcoin dominance a while back, though.
I did. Yeah. I saw the light.
Yeah, you saw the light.
I mean, why were you so confident? Just let's start at the beginning and say, why were you so confident when Bitcoin dominance was so strong and Bitcoin was Bitcoin dominance was at 41%. Why were you so confident that we were going back to 60?
You know, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is basically just like looking at this chart, the Bitcoin dominance chart. I was looking at this thing, and you know, if you remember back in 2021, we had all this money printing, right, from the pandemic. We had so many VCs, we had all these meme coins, and I was so perplexed that despite all of that, dominance didn't really go below the prior cycle low of 35%, right? And I think a lot of people thought we would go below 35% last cycle. And had you asked me back in 2020, I would have also thought dominance would have gone below 35%. But once we got to the end of 2021 and it was still at 39%, I then sort of came to this realization that, you know, what if it's just putting in higher lows, but also potentially putting in lower highs, right? And so maybe the path for Bitcoin dominance is something like this, where it's kind of converging, you know, to whatever the fair value of dominance is, right? Maybe it's 50%, I don't know. But that was sort of the thought process. And then the other thing was, if you look at dominance in 2021, you can see that it really started to break down right here at this weekly candle, March 29th of 2021. And so I just sort of assumed, well, there's a good chance that dominance will return back to where it sort of started, this sort of altcoin bubble against Bitcoin. And so that's what basically happened. We saw dominance basically return back there at 60%. And then the final reason, which wasn't a reason when I first made that tweet, but it was something that I found later and I used it as confirmation bias, was that last cycle dominance retraced to the 0.618 fib level. And that happened to line up with, you know, right around 60% dominance. So those are the reasons I think Bitcoin dominance. We're going to go back to 60%. And also, too, I mean, the argument is that Bitcoin is king, you know, and when a lot of people join the cryptoverse, they join only wanting to buy altcoins because when they joined at the peak of a parabolic bull run, Bitcoin had already made its move. So when they joined, they never saw Bitcoin move because they joined after the parabolic run was over and they started chasing the altcoins. But when you get into the bear market, Bitcoin dominance goes up. And usually the first year or two of the bull market, Bitcoin dominance goes up.
Do you think that Bitcoin's already made its run this time around? So in other words, I mean, we've had a very, very good year in Bitcoin. We're now over $100,000. Like, do you think that the majority of the acceleration in the Bitcoin run has happened? And the reason why I ask that is because I know naturally you would say, yes, you'd say, yes, it is. The dominance has started to break down. This could be the beginning of Altseason. But, you know, you've got a United States president that's coming in and talking about potentially a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You've got ETFs which have like an insatiable demand for Bitcoin. If I look at the ETF flows for the last couple of days, I'll call them up for us onto the screen over here. So if I look at the ETF flows are like highly positive, with like $500 million days and sometimes even $750 million days. These are like $750 million. These are big inflows into Bitcoin. So do you think that the Bitcoin acceleration cycle is now topped out, or do you think that there's still a way to go?
Are you talking about it specifically through the lens of Bitcoin dominance or just Bitcoin USD?
Just Bitcoin USD. And we'll talk about Bitcoin dominance in a second. But yeah, Bitcoin USD, do you think that there's still huge upside to go?
So here's a good chart. I mean, this is the ROI of Bitcoin as measured from the low. And it always feels like every cycle's different. Even this cycle, it always feels like it's different, you know? But then you look at the ROI of Bitcoin so far this cycle as measured from the low, and that's this purple line, it's basically right in between the last two cycles, right? I mean, at this point, last cycle, the ROI of Bitcoin from the low was about 10x. And 2 cycles ago, the ROI was almost 6x. And right now, we're at basically 6.5x. So we're essentially where we always are. I think the argument, though, is that if you look at all market cycles, there is some element of diminishing returns from one cycle to another. That's not a knock on Bitcoin. It's just that as the market cap grows, it takes, exponentially more and more money to continue to move the price. It's sort of just a natural progression of things. And so, with Bitcoin already being up 6x off the low, how far did it go last cycle, right? Well, last cycle, it went up about 20x from the bottom. And if you were to assume diminishing returns, then you would assume that it probably won't go up 20x this cycle. So I would say that, certainly a large amount of the easy gains on Bitcoin are gone. The easy gains, of course, occur when Bitcoin dominance is going up, right? That's the easy time because it's just like, stick with Bitcoin. Most alts will bleed to it and let it run its course. But after Bitcoin dominance, really starts to top out, things become a lot less clear. And the reason is because the money that was primarily focused on going into Bitcoin, it's still there, but people will start to speculate on other parts of the market, right? Sort of the frothier parts of the market, the lower market cap altcoins. And that's what normally leads to alt season, right? Which everyone, loves. And alt season is a good thing and a bad thing, right? It's good because you can make a lot of money in a really short period of time. It's bad because normally alt season eventually leads to Bitcoin getting a correction and reminding us that it is in fact king. So I would argue that from this point on, the easy move by Bitcoin, right, where dominance goes up with it, is probably behind us. It doesn't mean it can't go higher. It just means you might see market participants start to speculate on other things more.
Based on the previous cycles that you've looked at, where do you think this cycle ends, and when and at what price do you think Bitcoin will be? And I'm going to hold you to a price, but I'm just trying to understand. Like you seem to be comparing it back to previous cycles all the time, and if we were to follow previous cycles, taking into account diminishing returns, how do you see the cycle playing out? How long would it last, and where will we land up towards the end?
Yeah, so I guess the easy thing to do is just to look at when all prior cycles have ended, and that's sort of the baseline assumption, I suppose. But there's also counterpoints to that I think we should all be aware of. Everyone should know that all prior Bitcoin cycles, at least the last 3, they November. Topped in either November or December of post-halving years, right? This was November of 2021. This was December of 2017. And this is November of 2013, right? So they all topped in Q4 of the post-halving year, which would be about 11 to 12 months from now.
Can I just can I just stop you there for 1 sec? So in 2021, there was the May top, which was about 5% lower than the November top, right? So I think Bitcoin was at about 65,000. That seemed to be an anomaly from the previous 2 cycles. What do you think that anomaly? How do you? Because the reason I ask is because when I looked at the 2021 cycle, I kind of said maybe the top was actually kind of in May. And the reason why I said that was maybe it wasn't the top of the chart, but in terms of a risk reward, you had to hold through 60 days, a negative 60% move just to get an extra 5% in November, which, to me, it almost said, look, the top of the cycle was actually May, and there was like a pseudo top which happened afterwards. But the risk reward for holding to that next top wasn't actually worth it.
Right. No, I think that's a fair assumption. In fact, I mean, most charts, most indicators said that April was the top, right? I mean, if you go look at, there's actually a lot of different things you can look at for that, right? If you go look at the social interest in crypto,
yes,
back then, the social risk, I mean, it topped out in May, right? Exactly when you said, right? That was when retail interest peaked, and everything after that was a lower high. If you look at the Pi cycle top, right? I mean, the Pi cycle top triggered in April back then, right? So a lot of things, and even the risk metric that I use, right? If you go look at the risk metric that I use to buy and sell Bitcoin, it also topped in, early 2021. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there was sort of an anomaly there. And so you could argue that last cycle topped in April, which brings me to my next point, right? I mean, look, I think it's there's sort of right translated cycles and left translated cycles. And we've seen 3 4-year cycles so far, and all of them have been right translated, where, you have a peak at the end, or, sort of near the end of the cycle. There are left translated cycles that a lot of people have talked about, and it's possible that we're in one. Basically, a left translated cycle means that the market tops out a lot sooner than people are expecting. And I wouldn't be completely surprised if something like that were to happen, where it kind of tops out like way before people actually think it's going to. But at this point, there's a lot of the major indicators that you would look at to sort of try to identify market cycle tops. They haven't yet triggered yet. I mean, even this risk metric, one of the reasons why I didn't think 73K was the top was because we only went to, say, like the 0.7, 0.8 risk band. We also didn't see the pi cycle top go off.
Just for if you go look. For those viewers who don't know what a risk metric is, just what are you measuring with this with the red line? What is the risk metric?
It's basically just looking at it's basically just looking at historical returns of Bitcoin and factoring in, its prior volatility and looking at diminishing returns and trying to figure out where the next top's going to be.
Yes.
So historically, major tops, if we color code it by the risk, right? So historically, major tops occur, in the 0.8 to 1 risk bands, right? And so you can see right there, June of 2011, April 2013, November 2013, December 2017, early 2021. We haven't gone up to that risk band yet. So that would suggest that we could still go higher. But there's always, here's the thing. No one knows when the top's going to occur. And I mean, you were here back in April of 2021. I don't think any of us had the faintest clue when Bitcoin was trading at 15K, just a few months earlier, that we would be pushing 70K, by April of 2021. No one knew it was going to go that quickly. It's more so when it happens, you have to be ready to react, right? No one knows when it's going to actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the risk indicator, the social indicators certainly don't indicate that we're anywhere near a top, but things can happen pretty quickly, right? Like things can happen. Retail can come back pretty quickly. Altseason can happen pretty quickly. And so like in my calculations, I've kind of said, look, for me, I'm kind of saying that it's going to be somewhere between April and November. And in terms of like a risk exit strategy, I kind of want to be exiting risk sometime between April and November based on all the other indicators. What indicators would you look at to mark the top? So like maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 indicators that you'd say, look, when these indicators do this, this, and this, to me, that indicates that we're probably nearing a top.
I would look towards social interest, right? I mean, right now it's basically right around 0.3 risk. Kind of funny, in late 2020, in December of 2020, it was also right around this level, right? The social interest was basically the same as it is today, 4 years later. I would look at the Bitcoin risk metric that I just showed you. I would also look at sort of the extension from the fair value. So this is the total crypto market cap and trend line. This is the entire asset class, and just sort of seeing the extension above the fair value. You can look at it here and sort of see how eventually it tends to extend beyond the fair value a decent amount. I would be looking at that. I also think there's some sort of like more silly indicators that you could look at, just like, the RSI, which is not, I don't really use the RSI to trade, but I try to use it to tell me when the market is getting somewhat heated. And, if you look at the relative strength index on the monthly, I mean, you can basically tell, like, when you're nearing, and this is another indicator, by the way, that would have told you that May 2021 was a more significant top. So I would look at that kind of stuff. And actually, if you go look at the RSI on the 2-week, you can see that one of the reasons why it was more obvious that March of 2024 was sort of the mid-cycle top was because, it basically had hit this trend line once again. And you have to wonder, and here's the thing, Rand, that I want to point out to people, and I don't know if it's going to play out like this or not, but look, base case probably should be exactly what you said, right? Sometime between April and November. That seems to make the most amount of sense. The only thing I would say is if you look at the 2-week RSI, in 2013, we sort of had an early top in April and then another top in Q4. And there's just like, if this continues to accelerate and tags this trend line at some point in the next few months, like there is a chance that could be it, right? Whenever that occurs, right? Whether it occurs in April or March or June or July, right? That could be it. There's one thing I'd like to draw your attention to just really, really quick, because I found a lot of similarities with it this year, and it actually went to help figure out like, the market might actually just kind of do nothing for 6 months. If you look at the launch of the QQQ back in 1999, it launched at 48. And remember, the price of Bitcoin when Bitcoin's ETF launched was 48K, right? We saw a surge to 48K when that ETF launched. And essentially what happened when the QQQ launched at around 48, it took exactly, let me switch this over to a weekly time frame. It took exactly 48 weeks to pass 100, right? So it took 48 weeks to pass 100, and it was right here, right? It finally passed that 100 milestone, I believe. No, it was right here. It was the following week, right? So it was 48 weeks. I got it one week too short. 48 weeks to pass 100. Bitcoin, I know this sounds crazy, but Bitcoin just passed 100, and it happened 47 weeks after the ETF launched, right? So let's just take a look at this for 1 second. It's probably not going to play out the same way, but just so everyone's aware, because the market's going to throw us a curveball next year. I think it's going to throw us a curveball. Here's the crazy thing: is that after it passed 100. The QQQ got a pullback back down to say like in the mid 90s. We just saw Bitcoin got its pullback back down into the 90s. And then it went all the way up to 120. 120. So I'm curious if maybe that's the next stop for Bitcoin, is to sort of see a move up to 120. And what's really fascinating is that it hit that top 54 weeks after the ETF launched, right? 54 weeks. And what sometimes makes me wonder if we are in fact.
You're giving me goosebumps, man. You're giving me goosebumps. I mean, the ETF launch was January.
I know. But listen to this. If this is not my base case. I mean, my base case is like probably what you said, right? April to November. But again, I think as an investor, we have to look at all possible outcomes, no matter what, right? We always have to look at all possible outcomes. And what's really interesting is that 54 weeks after the ETF launched happens to be Inauguration Day for the president, January 20th. Also the day that Gary Gensler is resigning. So here's the thing. I think what's likely going to happen is, Bitcoin will continue to do its thing for at least a few more weeks. My guess is there's going to be some type of a pullback in January or February. But the reason I say January is because you're going to get the inauguration, and then everyone's going to want to ask themselves, all right, do we actually get a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? Is it all talk, or is it actually going to happen? If it happens, then we should have no problem going higher, right, throughout 2025. If it doesn't happen, you probably could see a large correction. But here's the thing: regardless of whether it happens or not, there's probably going to be a brief de-risking period sometime in January. And it's not unique to this cycle, right? That's going to be the narrative for this cycle. Oh, it's will the strategic reserve actually happen? But what I think is more important is if you look back at prior cycles, there's usually a correction in January, right? Here's the correction in January 2017. Bitcoin dropped about 30 to 40%. And we got a 30 to 40% correction in January of 2021. So I'm sort of thinking that you might see Bitcoin do something similar, right? Where it accelerates into the ETF launch, right? It accelerates into Inauguration Day, and then there's a de-risking period on the other side of that. And if you actually get the strategic Bitcoin reserve, then again, you should have no problem going higher later on in the year. Because, what the QQQ did was it basically went all the way up to 120, and then it had a flash crash down to 60. Yeah. But then here's the thing. No one would have known the bull market was over back then a year later, right? I mean, the market still then put in higher lows for another 3 quarters before it started to go down. So you could even argue that if something like this were to happen, this might be a pretty big alt season, because if Bitcoin's already topped out and altcoins are running, like that could be a time for maybe Ethereum to do really well. But again, this isn't the base case. It shouldn't be. I think what should be is just sort of deferring to sort of seasonality, historical ROI of Bitcoin. But one really interesting thing, if you measure ROI of Bitcoin peak to peak, you can see that we're actually tracking, pretty well. But one of the things you said earlier, right? What if you take April as the top? If you take April as the top from the last cycle and you compare it to the 2016 cycle, right? It looks like if you compare to the 2016 cycle, we're ahead of schedule, right? It looks like we're a little bit ahead. But if you take April as the top, it looks like we're a lot further along, right? And it kind of matches up a lot better. So if this is the case, we're currently on day 1338 and the cycle ended on day 1473, which would be about 4 months from now, right? 4 to 5 months from now. So like, I think what you said makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think you got to be aware sometime between April and November is the most likely outcome, but also be prepared for the market to throw us a curveball.
So with that in mind, where do you think the Bitcoin ends in terms of a number? And again, I'm not going to hold you to a number because none of us are here to make price predictions, so to speak. I'm just, I want to just maybe narrow it down to diminishing returns. As you mentioned, it's a lot heavier now. The asset is a lot heavier, but we do have a lot more inflows. If you were to speculate based solely on previous cycles, where would you put the top of the cycle?
So yeah, based on prior cycles, if you expect diminishing returns. So last cycle we saw, like a little over a 20x, like a 23x. Cycle before that was 100x. So I mean, certainly hitting 100K was the main objective this cycle. As far as how much above it does it go? The QQQ went to 120. Bitcoin, let's see it bottomed at 15K. So a 10x would be 150. A 10x would still be diminishing returns, right? It would still technically be diminishing returns. I will say I do disagree with there are some views out there that people say it's going to go to 1 million this cycle. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't really think there's any chance of that happening. I also don't really think it's going to go to 300 either. My best guess is that the top is somewhere between 1 to 200 is my best guess. I don't think it's going to go above 200. Again, I hope you don't hold me to that because obviously things can change, but best guess is somewhere between 1 to 200. And I would be surprised if it made it all. If it's going to go to 200, it's probably not going to happen until a year from now, right? Until a full year. I mean, it would be a while. In fact, if you look at what Bitcoin has historically done, every single time it sort of built out a base. Like, look at this. It just keeps 2xing, right? This was 15K. Then it went from 15 to 30, then 30 to 60, and then 60 maybe to 120, right? Which is exactly where the QQQ topped out, right? At 120. So if it's a left translated cycle and 120 is the top, again, you're not going to know it until October of 2025, because it'll basically be, all right, October is here. This is normally the time that Bitcoin starts to go up, right? We saw it go up in 2023, October, 2024, October. A lot of people will be expecting the same thing, October 2025. So if it doesn't before the end of the year, people aren't going to know it until then.
Okay. Do you think, how long do you think we can keep relying on the 4-year cycle for? Like, it just, surely, like, is it all around the halving? Is this whole Bitcoin movement actually around the fact that the mining rewards halve? Reason I ask is because more and more the amount of Bitcoin that's coming out of the ground, coming out of the mining machines, are becoming less and less relevant relative to the supply, right? Because 19 plus million have already been mined. Like, surely at some point the slow supply doesn't matter and the demand has just become so much. So do you think that the 4-year cycle is something that we're just going to carry on talking about until 2150 or whenever the 4-year cycle ends?
I think the 4-year cycle has a lot of merit. I think it's mostly probably based around like elections and stuff, because there's like the 4-year, every 4 years in the United States we have these elections and whatnot. But I think the timing of the peak within each 4-year cycle could be different, right? So there's a good chance you will find a major low approximately every 4 years. I mean, even if you go back and look at the stock market in the 1970s, it basically had lows almost every, basically every 4 years. And it essentially always happened in the midterm year, right? In the year to, sort of in between presidential elections, when the president isn't going to be that concerned about, as concerned about public opinion, because, they're 2 years after the election that just got them elected, and they're still 2 years out from the next election. So I would say that there's a good chance that I think there's a good chance the 4-year cycle will likely continue to prevail. But my guess is that the timing of the peaks within each 4-year cycle could change. And I think we got a glimpse of that last cycle when, as you noted, right, the top was in April, and then it just barely went higher 6 months later, right? What if this happens? What if you get a top early on again, maybe like what you said, like in April, and then everyone's expecting it to go higher in November, but then maybe it's just a lower high or something, right? So I think the actual tops could occur at different points in the cycle, but the lows for each cycle could very well just simply correspond to every midterm year.
Let's go back to the Bitcoin dominance chart. On your screen when you showed it, if you just don't mind putting it back there. So when you showed the Bitcoin dominance chart, it looked like there was a wedge with higher highs and higher lows and lower highs on the Bitcoin dominance, right? And effectively, when you think about Bitcoin dominance, you think about the relevance of Bitcoin as a godfather of the asset class, right? And what this chart is saying is that in 2018, the relevance of altcoins was the best relative to Bitcoin, which means that the promise that altcoins held to change the blockchain world was the highest, less so in 2021. Are you forecasting that this cycle, the dominance will actually end not as like on a higher low?
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is like, if you had asked me that same question 4 years ago, I would have said no. Like, I would have said it would probably go to a lower low. But I also think that you kind of have to respect the market, and the market basically said you can print as many altcoins as you want. It doesn't necessarily mean Bitcoin dominance is going to put in a lower low, right? There's still, the amount of capital going into the altcoins isn't going to change just because you print 10,000 more meme coins, right? It's just it just gets diluted. So I would argue that, yeah, like it's probably going to be a higher low. I would expect that, it depends on when it happens. I mean, if dominance just goes down now, then maybe it bottoms out at like 42, 43%. If it doesn't happen until, say, January of 2026 or something, maybe it'll be 44, 45, 46%, right? It all depends on when it actually happens. And there's also this idea, I think, that a lot of people are looking at is, are we here, right? Are we right here where dominance is starting to really break down? Or are we somewhere else where, we get up to a high, but then we don't actually get this big move down immediately, right? It's always possible that move down that we want is still a month or two away, or maybe 6 months away, right? There's no guarantee that this is the moment that you're actually going to see dominance go all the way back down. And a lot of it will depend on what Bitcoin does, right? If Bitcoin starts to go up again aggressively, like it did last year around this time, then, Bitcoin dominance could go back up again. That doesn't mean it has to go to a new cycle high, but it could continue to sort of delay, the alt season that people really want to see.
So if you were to put your money down, to put your money where your mouth is, would you say that alt season started, or would you say that it's not alt season yet?
I think that, look, I mean, there's no denying that we've at least experienced a mini alt season. Because, I mean, look, if you go look at the alt season index, right, let's just go look at the data, you can see that it basically just had a spike all the way up to, into the 80s, right? Yeah. Which historically, that is representative of alt season. But there's a difference between sort of a quick spike there, like, because there was also a spike into alt season here in August of 2022, but it only stayed there for a few weeks because then Bitcoin just started going up again, and then alt season was just delayed once more. I mean, again, whenever Bitcoin moves aggressively, the altcoin market takes a back seat because no one wants to miss the run by the king, right? No one wants to feel like they're getting left behind when Bitcoin goes up. When altcoins go up, there's 1,000 of them, right? So take your pick. But when Bitcoin goes up, it basically just leaves everything behind. So I think for sure we just had a mini alt season. It could still be ongoing. in order to get a real alt season, right, the one that people remember from 2021, ETH has to join the party, right?
I was about to ask. I was about to ask before you carry on. Is ETH the alt season indicator, or is it because you do have Solana the cycle as well? Like, is ETH still the big daddy altcoin, or I don't know? It feels like ETH may have been slightly left behind this cycle.
So, but it normally does this. I mean, and in fact, if you look at ETH Bitcoin in 2016, it was also dropping right here, right? It was it bottomed out in December of 2016. You can see it just kind of went down in Q4. Even in 2019, ETH Bitcoin bottomed in December. That was December of 2019. Here, this is December of 2020, January 2021. This right here, December of 2017. This is December 2018. This is December 2015, right? Every single time that you get into Q4, ETH Bitcoin tends to underperform, right? ETH underperforms Bitcoin historically in Q4, but then it normally bottoms out in either December or January. So it could have already it's possible that ETH Bitcoin has already bottomed. If it hasn't bottomed, then you probably just get a sweep of the prior low, kind of like what you did in 2020. Like if you look at 2020, ETH Bitcoin had sort of a little bit of a bounce right here in November into early December, and then it sold off one last time into late December, early January, right? So there's a chance that ETH Bitcoin gets another sell-off, but I think the low is either in or it's really close to being in. You want to know a fascinating chart, by the way, is not the ETH Bitcoin chart. It's the ETH MicroStrategy chart, right? And I look at this chart, and I can't help but think that there's a good chance that ETH will outperform MicroStrategy next year.
ETH will outperform MicroStrategy next year.
Look at the chart. I mean, I could be wrong, but look, MicroStrategy has done phenomenally well, right? I mean, it's done amazingly well, and I'm not saying it can't continue to do well, but there's also this reality that as the labor market continues to loosen up, right, as the unemployment rate continues to trend higher, the Fed, they're going to lower interest rates, which they are, and they're going to start up QE, which means the higher risk coins will start to outperform the lower risk coins. That's at least what we've historically seen. So yeah, I would say like there's a good chance that a year from now, or let's say like by January of 2026, when we look back, I think the ETH MicroStrategy valuation will likely be higher than it is today. A lot higher.
What do you think of the MicroStrategy? What do you think of MicroStrategy valuation? I mean, when you look at MicroStrategy as an equity, do you think that MicroStrategy is extended? Do you think it's healthy?
It is extended, but I mean that isn't, assets can become more extended, right? I mean, just to put in perspective how much it's gone up. If you look at Bitcoin from where it went from 2021, it essentially just retraced to it's now at the 1.618 fib retracement level. If you look at the same thing for MicroStrategy, right, just to give you an idea of how much MicroStrategy has outperformed Bitcoin from the 2021 top, it went to the 4.236 retracement.
Wow.
Right? So again, that doesn't mean it can't continue to go up. What the thing I find a lot of times with assets like this, where they've just gone parabolic, is basically everyone who's held them for the last 2 years cannot see a bubble, and everyone that has not held them only sees a bubble, right? Because everyone's sort of biased into believing like it's going to go in the direction they want it to go. I don't know exactly how much higher it's going to go. There's a couple different ways you could look at the MicroStrategy valuation. One way is to basically look at it compared to, speaking of the QQQ, right, looking at it compared to what it did over here in the .com era, and seeing it also had a major spike. But that's sort of the bearish way to look at it. There's a more optimistic way to look at it, and that's to look at MicroStrategy divided by M2. If you look at MicroStrategy divided by M2, you can see that actually back in the .com era, it actually went quite a bit higher.
Way higher.
Yeah. And in fact, it also had a pullback around this point, right, where it basically rallied up here. So if you just look across the screen, let's just draw those lines. You can see that it had this rally right there to the exact same point that it just rallied to. And then it had a pullback, basically just to where it had a pullback to. And then after that pullback, it then had another rally. This was in January that lasted 2 months, right? It lasted 2 more months. And then, all hell broke loose, right? But it's important to remember what happened in the past so that we don't make the same mistakes. But look, MicroStrategy's done phenomenally well. Saylor's done more for Bitcoin than almost anyone else I can think of. But at times, assets do get overvalued and they do come back down to earth at some point.
Look, I agree with you that Saylor's done a lot for Bitcoin. And I think, I've been thinking about what he's actually done, but he's actually created a path for all the fixed income money that's in the world. And that's $6.5 trillion or whatever else to have a gateway into Bitcoin, which is that's a piece of incredible engineering. But does it not worry you that one entity is one entity, not even one asset class, but one entity is now 2.3% of all the Bitcoin that will ever be mined? And I just feel a little bit uncomfortable that when I looked at the buying pressure on Bitcoin, Saylor's bought $17 billion worth of Bitcoin in 38 days or something. Isn't that, it worries me when markets are not healthy, when markets are not diversified, and when there's one player responsible for lots of the upward pressure, then I kind of get a little bit nervous. Even though it looks like it can continue forever, it will continue until the music stops. Are you comfortable with the market structure?
Well, that's why I'm saying. That's why I think dominance normally goes. So normally dominance goes down. Bitcoin dominance normally goes down in post-halving years, and I think that could be a reason why you see dominance not be as strong in 2025, because you might see, MicroStrategy has been a tailwind for Bitcoin for the last 2 years, right? It just keeps on buying, and that's been a really good thing. I could see MicroStrategy becoming a headwind for Bitcoin, where some people start to look at this chart and they're like, well, how much higher could it go before it becomes a problem? And then you're going to look around and you're going to see, well, there's a lot of other altcoins and they don't have that same risk, which is probably one of the narratives as to why dominance might go down in 2025. So look, I don't know exactly where it's going to stop. I don't know exactly when the music's going to stop, but whenever it does stop, obviously there is, that is a concern, right? There is a concern. By the way, I wanted to, can I mention something about Solana really quick?
I was about to actually ask you, and maybe this will give some context. When we last spoke, and I said to you, what do you actually do when you believe that the Bitcoin dominance is going to start dropping? And you said to me, well, I just go a little bit more into ETH. Is that still your thesis, or do you sometimes go even lower down, into things like Solana and maybe some other things?
Yeah, no, ETH is just the obvious one. ETH is the obvious one to start at, but even XRP, right? That was an obvious, and I'll show you what I'm looking at. So look at Solana Bitcoin. So this was a chart, and I'll just, you said I got a lot of things right this cycle. There's also a lot of things I got wrong, and one of the things I got wrong was the Sol Bitcoin chart. So because back in late 2022, early 2023, I wasn't really on the lookout for double bottoms on alt Bitcoin pairs because Bitcoin dominance was so low. I didn't really care. I'm like, dominance is going to go to 60%. I'm not going to waste my time. But what you look for with alts, you look for these double bottoms, right? Because when they occur, you normally get a very explosive move by that altcoin. And that's exactly what happened with Solana. Now, I'm going to come back to Solana in a minute. If you look at XRP Bitcoin, this is something that, I was talking about a lot over on my stuff, because I was looking at this and I'm like, look, guys, this is a double bottom by XRP Bitcoin. There's a good chance it's going to get a really nice rally. We've seen this set up before where it gets these double bottoms. It gets really nice rallies off of it. So that's what you look for. You can see the same thing, like Aave Bitcoin is doing really well today, and it has been for a little while. And it was also sort of identifying these double bottom setups. So it's not just ETH. It's just that you look for double bottoms on alt Bitcoin pairs. There's one that's potentially setting up right now. I don't know if it's actually going to play out or not, but if you look at BNB Bitcoin,
wow,
I'm curious if by the end of the year, early next year, you see a double bottom on it, right? Because you can see last year it bottomed out in December. It's not that far away from a potential double bottom. So that's something to consider. You could also make the case that this is the double bottom, right? It's just sort of a higher low double bottom. AVAX Bitcoin had something like that as well, where it basically, there was this low, but then it had sort of a double bottom just off of that low, and then it got a little rally. So you have to keep that in mind as well. But one of the things I wanted to mention to people as far as Solana is concerned is, a lot of these altcoins follow this pattern. And I want to show this really interesting pattern by Solana, is that it actually looks really, this is ETH, yeah. But Is it? Because if you look at this, it's following the same pattern so far. Like, look at ETH Bitcoin. This was a 90% drop, right? A 90% drop followed by a 500% rally, right? And after that 500% rally, ETH Bitcoin got this drop right here. And then, and this drop was essentially, it was putting in higher lows, right? It was putting in higher lows. Everyone was calling for the flippening. And then it got a drop. And then it had one more rally into the merge. And then this is what happened, right? Now, think about that chart. 90% down, 500% up, higher lows, fake out, one last rally, and then down. Look at Solana Bitcoin. It's the same thing. I mean, it's identical. Look at this. This is exactly a 90% drop, a 500% rally. You're putting in the higher lows. It might be starting to show a little bit of weakness here. If it breaks down, it doesn't mean it's over, right? You could have a scenario where it repeats what ETH Bitcoin did, where it sort of, and you can see it already started to break down a little bit right here. If it breaks down, people might think that's the end, right? But it could very well just pop right back up here in 2025, exactly what ETH Bitcoin did, and then start to fade, out in 2026. So there is a chance that something like that happens. So, for people that are curious, like, what's Sol doing? Like, why is it not going up with the rest of the market? This could be this pattern. It's sort of the same pain that the ETH holders have felt for the last couple of years, right? Where they get this massive rally. And then it just kind of stalls out for a while.
You see, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable in my seat because I'm a Solana holder, and you're making this. You're making this.
But remember, this is Sol Bitcoin, not Sol USD.
Yes,
right?
But
So you could have a scenario where Sol Bitcoin goes down, but Sol USD goes up, right?
Yeah.
So it's not. And by the way, I mean, if this plays out, there would still be another rally by Sol Bitcoin, but it just wouldn't be until 2025.
Question: how does Ben trade this? And I know how I would trade this. I'm a lot more gung ho than you are. I think I have a much higher risk tolerance than you are. I'm not as conservative. How do you trade this? And specifically, I'm asking you two things. One is, in these periods where you think it's alt season, and you show me charts like the XRP chart, and you show me charts like the ETH chart, does that mean that you cash out your Bitcoin and actually go into things like using Bitcoin, go into XRP and ETH, number one? Number two, at the end of the cycle, when we say it's the end of the cycle, does that mean that you actually trade out of your Bitcoin and go back into fiat while you wait for the Bitcoin USD pair to actually play out?
So the way I do it is until the risk metric, until we go to what I think is a market cycle top, whenever I take profits from altcoins, I just put them back in Bitcoin because my unit of account is Bitcoin, right? I think in terms of Satoshi, right? If you go and buy a car, do you think like, oh, that cost, $50,000 or whatever? Or do you think oh crap, it costs half a Bitcoin, right? So, my unit of account is Bitcoin. So I take those profits. So when I look at charts like that, like XRP Bitcoin or BNB or Sol, whatever, because my unit of account is Bitcoin, I would then just convert some Bitcoin into that altcoin in hopes of seeing a return. And then if it does go up, I will look at the risk metric for Bitcoin. If it's already gone to the 0.8, 0.9 risk band, then I'll just take profits to US dollars, right? If Bitcoin hasn't gone to that risk band, then I'll typically take profits back to Bitcoin. And the reason is because Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside, but it does minimize your downside risk, right? If Bitcoin were to have a flash crash to like say 70K or 80K or something, it's probably going to hold up better than the altcoin market. In fact, just a few days ago, we saw Bitcoin drop into the 90s. And what happened, right? Bitcoin dominance spiked back up, right? It retested this trend line right here. So that's how I think about it. Go ahead.
No, I mean, and at the end of the cycle, do you go back into fiat? Like, if you think that the cycle ends in November, do you actually take your Bitcoin and cash out your Bitcoin into fiat?
Yes. I mean, I sell based on the risk levels, right? So if we're at 0.9 to 1 risk, I don't care about what the narratives are. I'm running for the hills. I don't really care at that point. And it's, even if I don't cash out everything, right? I want to be clear. I don't cash out everything because the reason is because all models are wrong, right? All models are wrong. Some are useful, and I try to use some to be useful to help me navigate when to sell, but I don't ever sell everything because even if you hadn't sold in late 2021, you're still doing okay now, right? Even if you hadn't sold. So I think there's some case to be made that just keeping, always having some Bitcoin is probably the way to go. Because if you don't at least have some, then even in a bear market, on every bear market rally, you're going to freak out and probably FOMO in at the next lower high, right? If you have some, then at least you can feel somewhat comfortable that if the market does go up, you're not entirely getting left behind.
Got you, Ben. Listen, it's been fucking fascinating having you on the channel. It's been, number one, it's been too long, but it's also been absolutely fascinating. Guys, if you want Ben's system, which I use, by the way, I mean, I've been a long-term subscriber only because Ben gave it to me for free at one of the conferences. But since then, it's become really one of the best tools that I've used. There is a link below, and I can tell you that it's probably the best money you've ever spent. It really has all the indicators that you saw Ben using. And I think, Ben, if you sign up for into the Cryptoverse, do you get access into all the other things? I know you have Discords and you have parties which we attend all the time. Just maybe give us a rundown of what happens when people sign up.
Yeah, the website, we have videos, there's the parties. The parties are probably the funnest part. I think you went to the last couple of parties.
Yeah, I was in Nashville, I was in Miami. I've been to the last couple, yeah. Yeah, I've been to quite a few. Yeah, they're usually the best party. So, guys, you can sign up. There's a link below. Also, there's, of course, links to Ben's socials, his Twitter, his YouTube, and everything else. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. It's been long overdue. Thank you so much. So much love from me and the Banter fam. I really appreciate you coming on, and I really enjoy these conversations with you. So thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Cool, guys. Thank you. And guys, we will see you guys again on Sunday. Sunday, we have a show for you guys. It's the 𝗕𝗔𝗙𝗑𝗑 show. This week on the 𝗕𝗔𝗙𝗑𝗑 show, we're going to be talking about AI agents and we're going to be talking about meme coins on one show. So it's like a 𝗕𝗔𝗙𝗑𝗑 show on Sunday. I will see you guys again on Sunday. Until then, trade well, my friends.